Hi there, I'm Socks, and in this video I'll be reviewing Storm Surge Free-for-All, a map made by Krutzy. And later on I'll be showing you how to make awesome custom builds like the one seen in this map. So let's begin with what Storm Surge Free-for-All actually is. A lot of you watching are probably thinking it's some kind of Zone Wars involving Storm Surge. If you don't know what Storm Surge is, I'll explain. Basically, when there are a lot of people left in a small zone, players who are below a certain damage threshold will take storm damage outside of the storm. What this does is force players to be aggressive in very campy lobbies. However, Storm Surge Free-for-All does not in fact have Storm Surge, and it isn't a Zone Wars. In this game, every player has a timer on the top left of their HUD, and this timer is constantly counting up. If your timer reaches 30, you die. In order to stop this, you'll need to get an elimination, which will reset the timer to 0. You also get a random loadout at the start of each round, and building is turned off. So now that we've talked about how the mechanic works, let's review it. This mechanic forces players to be aggressive, because if you don't get a kill, you die. And I think this is also a really good way to make eliminations feel more impactful in a game with infinite respawns. I also thought about how the game would be different if it was damage based, and I think kill based is a lot more interesting because it adds an element of speed. The map is so small, the third parties happen all the time, so you have to be quick and efficient to get a kill. Finally, I will change it from count up to count down, but it's a very small design choice. Now I'm going to talk about the map itself. I will be discussing aesthetics in a bit, but firstly, I just want to talk about how playable this map is. The first thing I'm going to talk about is there is no clutter. This may sound simple, but when you think about it, imagine trying to play and there are props all across the map that you had to keep walking around or climbing over, or it would be so annoying. Krutzy's done a really good job of still having detail, but making the map feel so fluid to move through, because there's no obstruction to your path. Secondly, I'm going to talk a bit about the sightlines in this map. I also discussed sightlines in my last video. Link in description. Lines of sight are really important, and if you look at Storm Surge Free-for-All, they've really done a good job of designing the map so there is always cover when you want it. And although this sounds like a really small thing, taking into consideration sightlines when you're making your map will bring the combat to the next level. Finally, I'm going to talk about the routes. This means the path players will take as they move through the map. And if you look at Storm Surge Free-for-All, you can tell the effort has been put in to this build. Having parkour routes also adds more skill and a puzzle aspect. Players who can spot routes and figure them out will be rewarded with the high ground and a short dopamine boost from the good old brain. It also adds more complexity to the map, making fights more vertical. Now let's talk about something that could have been improved in this game. The gameplay in this map, while being really fun, gets stale very quickly. I think by having more interesting mechanics in the environment, for example vents, would be a good way to make the gameplay fun for longer. This map also has really good terrain, but I feel like it was kind of wasted because going up the path would use a lot of time that players don't have. Speaking of terrain, I just want to say how well done this map is. It takes a massive amount of skill and effort to build a map that looks this good, and the terrain is amazing, as well as the custom builds, which are really good. More on that later. Okay, so in conclusion, I'm going to rate this map 8 out of 10. It looks great, plays great, and the concept is great. However, there are a few things that could be improved, so it isn't getting a 10 out of 10, but it still is a really well designed game. You're probably wondering when I'm actually going to talk about how to make custom builds, like the ones in Storm Surge Free-for-All. Well, there are 4 main things you can do to make really good looking custom builds. The first tip is palette. What I mean by this is the pieces you're going to be using in the build, and at a more advanced level, the colours. This will help you visualize and think about your build, as well as realize things that won't work before you get to the building process. Remember, you can always change things later, so don't feel like you have to use the palette you started off with. The second tip is to get a good shape. Getting a complex shape can make the build look a lot nicer, as well as opening up room for creative routes. Also remember, you can use build to prop to make less square builds. Once you nail the shape, the rest of the build will be a lot easier, and you can also use the shape of the build to draw players' attention to one point. The third thing I would advise doing is to frame your builds. Just like a picture frame, this will draw more attention into the centre of the build and add more depth, making the walls not so flat and plain. Framing can come in many forms, from trees and vines to raised foundations and pillars. The fourth and final tip is to break up the space. For example, take this wall. It's pretty ugly and plain, but when we add windows, it just looks so much better. This is because we're breaking up the space. You can do this with anything you want, as long as it works. You could use gargoyles, or vines, maybe windows, or just anything you can think of. Also remember that when you're breaking up space, players' eyes will be drawn to that object, so you could use this in adventure maps to get players to look in the right place. This will really make your build look so much better. I hope I've helped you with these tips to transform your builds. I'm Puffersocks. Thanks for watching.